Hi, everyone, and welcome to my beginner Valentine's Day class. I am so glad you're here. I'm really excited to teach you this class today. Got a phone in my face a little bit, but that's okay because you're mostly going to be concerned about the cookie cam down here. I just like to give the top half of my body so you can see my face, but also you can kind of see where I put my hands and positioning and all that kind of good stuff. So, since this is pre-recorded, I'm going to be starting with a little preamble, a little introduction. We're going to talk about just a little bit of prep stuff, tools and that kind of thing. Now, a lot of that, in fact, all of that, I think is covered in the workbook. And if you're like, Grace, I just want to get to decorating, no problem. This is pre-recorded. So there should be timestamps below, and you can just click on the timestamp you want to go to skip ahead. You can skip ahead to the practice sheet or straight to decorating. If you don't need the practice sheet today, I highly recommend it no matter what. It's always good to like get your muscles reminded about what you're doing today. And same deal though, since it's pre-recorded, if you need me to repeat something, you can always reverse, rewind, go back, start over. And also, if you need more time to do something, like you're doing multiple cookies, press pause, right? Okay, so enough with that. Let's get started and talk about the good stuff. So for those that are totally brand new here, most people I think who take my classes follow me on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube as The Graceful Baker, but maybe you're totally new here for whatever reason. Welcome. My name is Grace. I am a cookie artist and content creator. I've been a cookie artist for 12 years now, very casually at first. And over the last few years, I've grown it into a business, and now I do this full time. Love that. So I bring that up though. I'm what people would consider, I guess, an expert, advanced, whatever. But I've been doing it for 12 years. So 12 years of experience. You're not gonna perfect this overnight. Some people just have a natural gift and might get really good in like 6 months, but especially if this is your very first time, or I'd say one of your first half a dozen times, be kind to yourself. No matter what, be kind to yourself. Okay, royal icing is a hard medium to work with, pun intended. As you know, it dries hard. But really though, it's a finicky medium. I cried many tears decorating over the years. So be kind to yourself. I've been doing this for a very long time. I try to show you the good, the bad, the ugly, even when I mess up, because it still does happen. Okay. I am not perfect. This class here is with beginner cookiers in mind. And when I put a beginner class together, I am really focusing on the beginner at-home cookier, especially the person who has never decorated before. And I do that in my teaching style, but I also do it in the way that I design the class, because I really want to make it as approachable and accessible as possible. This is a difficult medium. The tools can get very expensive very quickly. It takes a lot of time. Okay, this is not something you can just like whip up in an afternoon. That's why in my workbooks, I recommend spacing your prep out, which is something I also did for a really long time because I was working another job. But also now I just prefer to do things one chunk at a time. It just makes everything feel so much more manageable. So we are doing 12 designs here, all with a heart. Now, this is a nod to my shape series sets. If you follow me on any of my platforms, I'm known for doing a shape series set, which is I decided to call it that, where I take one shape, a very limited color palette, and I just let my imagination flow. So this is a nod to that. We've got one heart here. We've got a limited color palette of white, purple, and pink. And I take it to another level with my beginner classes in that I really try to do just one consistency. So today we're working with what I call my thick flood, which, by the way, if you're totally new to cookies, most people are I would say, like, the way I learned how to do floods is with the seconds method. I don't do that anymore. I have videos on how I measure my different consistencies. I do it more with feel with the spoon, the spatula these days. So just keep that in mind. And what else was I going to say? Great question, Grace. 12 designs, one shape. These here, I don't have all of them out, but I really tried to pull in all of the classic techniques. It's a lot of wet on wet because we're working with one consistency. So that's like a major thing that you can do with one consistency. So some of these things, especially if you've taken my classes before, like you'd recognize this from the pumpkins. But these are all good things to know, and you can never repeat a technique too many times, especially wet on wet. Classic, can use it on so many different things. I will say the one downside to doing one consistency outline and flood, which is what we're doing today, is that there is a smaller window of like what's acceptable for your consistency in order to do what you need to do. So once you start decorating with me, if you discover that your icing is way too thick or way too thin, you have two choices. Number one choice is you can just, let's go the other option. Number one choice, you can rebag your icing. The way you would do that is you would just dump the icing out of the bag into a bowl and mess with it. If it's too thick, then you can add some water to it. If it's too thin, you should have some extra icing left over on the side. And I do not recommend adding powdered sugar if your icing is too thin. Absolutely just add a spoonful of unadulterated fresh icing from your original batch of icing. If you add powdered sugar, it's going to mess with the ratio of powdered sugar to meringue powder, and it will possibly not perform correctly, which again, royal icing, very finicky. You need to have the right ratios of meringue powder to powdered sugar and liquid. So for this particular set, now, if your icing is too thin, I would just leave it, honestly. Just extra, don't go all the way to the edge when I talk about that, because it'll give more space for it to spread out. If it is too thick, then you may want to rebag that, just because we're going to be doing a lot of this wet on wet, and wet on wet when your icing is too thick is just tier worthy. Or you can go with the approach of, you know what, this is a learning experience and I'm just going to charge forward. And honestly, often that's what I do. Because I cannot be bothered to rebag my icing. I only will if it's really catastrophic and or I'm doing a large volume and it will just make my life more miserable to not have the right consistency, because it's always a learning experience. And what I recommend when decorating cookies is to have a little notepad or digital, whatever, if you plan on doing this again, and take notes on what went well, what didn't go well. So next time you have a marker of, you know what, my icing was too thick as a thick flood this time, and I need to make a note of that for next time. It's, you know, as a beginner, 9 times out of 10, you are not going to get the consistency right. Hear that again. 9 times out of 10, you are not going to get the consistency right, and that is okay. Okay. As an expert, I would say probably 9 times out of 10, I get it right. Maybe even like 8 times out of 10. There are still times when I don't get my consistency right. And usually I just learn to like charge forward. But anyway, okay. We've talked about the approach to this set, the designs here. These are classic things that I think everyone needs to know how to do. So what you need to have on you, I've got just my samples here. Everyone needs to have their at least 12 naked cookies because we're doing 12 designs today. But also, if there are any designs you don't like, you can just skip them. You need your cookies. What else do we need? Obviously, we need our icing. And in the workbook, I do say to have large bags and small bags. And you can see for my small bags, I just tie them. But for my bigger bags, I do use a clip. Now, if you didn't do this, not catastrophic. For optimal success, I would recommend going back and just taking an ounce or two out of your big bag and putting it into a small bag. And the reason I do this is kind of my workaround for working with just one consistency and still having more control and doing like slightly more delicate designs. Because when you have a smaller bag of icing, you can do two things. First of all, just having less icing gives you more control. When you have a bigger bag of icing, you've got more icing pressing down, and your icing is going to come out a lot faster in the same consistency. You can also, so when we cut these bags today, because we are working with tipless bags, and I will be showing you how to cut these, we're going to be cutting this bag much bigger because this is the flood that's going to cover an entire cookie. But when you have a separate bag like this, we can actually cut this bag smaller. So it's going to have a smaller tip and it's going to have less icing in it. So we can do more control for smaller lines here, for smaller dots here, these kinds of designs. So not catastrophic if you don't have it, but I do recommend for some more control. We also need tools to decorate. So we need our practice sheets, which is the last page of your workbook. If you haven't printed that out, I would go print it now. I just wanted to show you, make sure that you are printing at 100%. My default printer prints to like scale to fit or something, which this is the scale to fit, and it's a little bit smaller than when I print at 100%. If you printed a bunch at the scale to fit, totally fine. It's just like a little bit smaller, and just keep that in mind. Not that much smaller, you can see. That's my practice sheet. And then we need some sort of a scribe. So you can have a real scribe, a metal scribe, or a plastic scribe, or a toothpick, totally fine. This is a very basic scribe that's on Amazon these days. And so I normally work with, this is my go-to favorite scribe. I actually have 3 that I always work with. But for the sake of doing a beginner class today, I'm going to be working with what you are probably working with, which is this. I haven't used a toothpick in many, many, many years, but that's what I started with. You also need something to make this crackle effect. Now, this is a great option for that because you want something with a rounded end to it. If you have a paintbrush with a rounded end, that's a great option. What you don't want is something like this that has a flat end. All right. You want a rounded end. So speaking of this is totally optional. Edible marker, you do not need this, but if you need a little help drawing out these curves, an edible marker is helpful. I also have here a pair of scissors. These are my favorite tiny scissors. They don't have to be tiny. I think it is easier to cut with smaller scissors, or easier to see what you're doing. But no matter what, they have to be sharp. Okay. And then I recommend, for the sprinkles here, we're working with sanding sugar. And as of right now, this is my favorite larger sanding sugar. Now, there are different sizes of sanding sugar. This here is the larger size. No one actually labels them, though, as small and large. The small size is much closer to the size of actual sugar crystals. Sugar, yeah, like table sugar. That's what I mean. I love this because it's just like extra shiny, but whatever you can find. Now, I do say, so make sure you have a bowl, nice bowl here with a spoon for optimal and clean execution. In terms of the sanding sugar, we're using it for this design here and this design here. I believe I did mark it as optional, though. It is not necessary. You could do these designs without the sanding sugar, absolutely. If you're going to keep doing this, I always recommend 3. Is it 3 types of sprinkles? Yeah. Like my go-to, what I'm always using, I mean, people buy fancy sprinkles and like fancy mixes. I don't really do that. I have large sanding sugar in white. I have small sanding sugar in white. And then I have white non-prize, which are the tiny little, tiny balls. So it is absolutely worth the investment. This looks like it was retailed at $5. And this lasts you a long time, okay? And then the last thing everyone needs, paper towels. I like to do these select-a-size ones, but whatever you have is great. If you have reusable towels, that is great too. All right. Couple of other last things to talk about in terms of the design of this set. So I did go with a heart here. This is a 3.25-inch heart. Okay. This size I picked specifically because when you're doing wet on wet with a one consistency, you don't want it to be too big. If it's too big, it's going to be hard. It's going to be harder for you to work with because the larger the surface, the more icing you need, the more time it takes to flood, the faster it will crust dry. So I would not recommend bigger than like a 3.5 inch. Somewhere between a 3 and a 3.5 inch would be ideal. If you're going to do anything, go smaller. In terms of the consistency we talked about, this is a thick flood only as you're mixing. If you are worried about it being too thick or too thin, I know we talked about that a little bit earlier, I would err on the thinner side again, because we're doing a lot of wet on wet and it will make your life much easier if it's too thin as opposed to too thick. And then in terms of the colors, okay, so I went with pink, purple, and white because I only wanted to use 3 colors. And I figured in terms of Valentine's Day, that's a pretty classic combo. Maybe pink and red is more classic, but red can be a challenging color to achieve and achieve well. Pink and purple, a lot easier. That said, you can do any color combo you want. You could do orange and blue, orange and purple would be nice, green and blue, yellow and blue. I would still recommend white as the third color, just because I think it's always nice to have white in a set, kind of balances out the color and everything. What was I going to say? And I don't know what else I was going to say. Point is, you can customize this to make this what you want it to be. Okay. I think that's all I want to say about this before we actually get started. Oh, last thing on the cookie shape. So I did pick this heart specifically. There is another heart that I prefer to use in my sets, but it has like a softer tip to the bottom. This one has a sharper tip, which I think is easier for beginners because you are going to touch down at the bottom. When it has a rounded corner, you aren't really supposed to touch down with the icing. This will make more sense once we get there. So point is, this is intentional, but if you have a heart that has like a rounded bottom, it's okay. We'll make it work. Okay. I think that is enough of a preamble and we can actually get to decorate. In addition to my paper towels on the side here, I do have a fan, a small fan over here. I usually decorate with a dehydrator, but you do not need a dehydrator. Also, in the name of decorating like you're decorating, I'm just using a fan today. A fan, a table fan. Table fan? Yeah, it's called table fan. Just have it directed at the cookies. It will help the icing dry a little bit faster, and it will, the air circulation, something about it gives a nice sheen to the icing. So just keep that in mind. Without further ado, I think we can actually get to decorate now. So I'm going to put my samples to the side for now. And what we're going to start with is our practice sheet. Okay. Put my extras to the side. And then you want to grab a paper towel. Make sure you have that handy. And your scissors. And then I would recommend starting with the purple, or you could do pink. But as you know, if you made way too much of one color, I would probably start with that just because you're using the extra to just practice first. But yeah, I like the purple. I don't want to use white for this just for the camera because it's not as easy to see. So first things first, you want to check to see if you have any air bubbles. And oh, I have some. There we go. You can see I have some air bubbles here. You also might get some separation depending on how long your icing has been sitting. That is totally normal for royal icing. It's when the liquid and the coloring separates from the powdered sugar. And that usually looks like however you set the bag down, usually the top of it is where that will settle and it will look darker. So before I cut the tip of my bag, I usually do a few things. I like to first just give it a little massage, and this will incorporate any mild amount of separation. If you have a ton of separation, which can't be integrated like this, then you may need to put it back in a bowl and give it a good mix. That's all you need to do. So I give it a good squishy squish, and then my preferred way to get air bubbles out is like this, doing the helicopter method. Only do this though before you cut your bag. Obviously, I'm holding onto it very tightly at the end. Something else you can do if you're too afraid to do that is this tapping method. It's a bit easier when the bag is bigger. But yeah, so you want to start off with a good, fully incorporated icing and no air bubbles. So I'm feeling good about this. I'm going to put my bag clip back on. All right. So first things first, I want to just show you how to hold the bag before we cut the bag, because once we cut it, icing is just gonna flow right out and you're gonna see. So first things first, let's talk about your arm placement. You can see this probably in the taller camera. So you always want to brace your arm on the table. I find a lot of people just hovering, which is not going to give you the most stability. So depending on where you're decorating, how long your arm is, yada, yada, yada. I usually brace my arm just above my elbow or maybe midway down my elbow. If I'm trying to reach really far, I might even put my elbow on the table. But in this case, I'm just like, I don't know, 6 inches away from the edge of the table. So I'm about halfway up my arm. You want to be able to move your arm in the pivot at almost 180 degrees. That's not 180. That's be somewhere between 90 and 180. Okay. And something else I see a lot of people do is they have their wrist really straight and only moving like this, but you want to have free movement of your wrist. So ideally, like when we start piping this, you should be able to pipe an entire line without moving the pivot of your arm. And yeah, so use your wrist. It's always good. Okay, so let's actually talk about holding the bag. Now, if you're right-handed, hold in your right hand. If you're left-handed, hold it in your left hand. And I will let you know, so when we get to piping, that lefties are actually going to do it differently, okay? So first things first, we're working with tipless bags today, which is not necessarily easier to work with, but it's just less of an investment, which is why I recommend it for beginners. So you're going to want to find the seam, which is pretty obvious. And then if you flip it over, directly over, you're going to find the fold, which is a little less obvious. Now, what I like to do is find the seam and line the seam up with your knuckles, okay? So line the seam up with your knuckles and then line the top of the bag up with the top of your hand. Okay, I'm just showing it at different angles here. So seam lined up with knuckles, that means the fold is directly across. And then you want to wrap your pointer and your thumb across the top of the bag. You should be able to hold the bag with only your pointer and your thumb. You do not want to be in the middle of the bag because then you're going to be sending pressure in both directions. You're going to be sending icing in two different directions, which is not good. You want to be pushing from the top down. Even if you're just barely below the top, you're still pushing icing in both directions. So if you find it annoying to have a clip, maybe you want to just rubber band or tie the top of your bags like this. I like these clips because they're not like, there are bigger clips that get in the way. I don't like them, but I like these. So holding from the top down, and then you can either wrap all of your fingers around it, or I tend to, with a bag like this size or smaller, I tend to wrap my finger and my pinky below the bottom of the bag. I find I have more stability. When I'm working with like a larger bag, I tend to do this, or when I'm flooding, I tend to have this this hand grip, because when you're flooding at a 90-degree angle. When you are piping, you're piping at a 45-degree angle, okay? And I tend to find I have more control like this, all right? So now we know how to hold the bag. If you need additional stability, you can always take your non-piping hand. I usually take my pointer and my middle finger and either brace the bag or brace kind of the fatty palm of your hand to give you some additional stability. This is not an indicator of skill level. I can name at least 2 expert cookiers who have this hand position. I just personally don't like it. I think it impedes my decorating. I prefer to just decorate with one hand. But something, if you have shaky hands, that's a great thing to do. So let's get to cutting the bag. Now, always good to like cut over maybe a paper towel. Try not to cut over your cookies because you're going to get a little piece of plastic that's going to go flying. Let me focus this camera. All right. So you can see I switched to my left hand. Just put it in whichever opposite hand, whether you're right or left-handed. I know some left-handed people cut with their right hand. So I'm putting this in my left hand. I put the seam on the bottom and the fold on the top. Some people cut with the seam on top, but I just find, depending on the bag, sometimes there's like extra plastic in that seam, and you're literally just cutting off a few millimeters. So sometimes I find that extra plastic can get in the way of your cut, and it's not a clean cut. So I like to have the fold on top because it's a cleaner cut. And then what else do I do? Lost my train of thought. Okay, so this is some finesse of how I hold my bag, but if you're interested, I like to hold it mostly at the bottom, whatever this is, and then I brace the tip on my pointer finger, okay? I've got both arms against the table. I am not freewheeling any of this. I want as much stability as possible. I like to fluff the end of the bag. Please do not crimp the end of the bag. Okay, it's not a big deal today because we're working with just a flood consistency. But since this is a tipless bag, if you crimp the end of the bag and we're working with a thicker consistency, like a piping consistency, you're not going to have a nice rounded tip. So just keep that in mind. So I like to fluff it just to make sure it's like even. You don't need to have icing all the way to the end. Take my scissors. So when I mentioned cutting millimeters. Now let's see, how thick do I want to do this today? Woo! All right, that's my flood. That's how much I just cut for my flood. So that's probably, I don't know, 6 millimeters ish. I'd say like my flood tends to be around maybe 5 or 6 millimeters, and my piping tip, which we will do today with our smaller bags, tends to be more like maybe like 3 to 4. But you can see here it's not a lot of plastic, okay? And you can always cut more. You can always cut more, but you can't go back. So, and when I talk about like adjusting it, I'm literally cutting a sliver off. Now you can see here the icing's already coming out of the bag because this is a thin, well, it's a thick flood. It's a flood. So flood is naturally just going to come out. So you know, good etiquette, you always want to lay your bag down on a paper towel or a towel or something. Yeah, if you do get icing on the table, I tend to find it's better to just let it dry and crust, and then like it becomes very easy to just like flick off. I can't think of the right word. I need some water. All right, now let's get to actual piping. Good etiquette here, always start by lightly sandwiching your bag in between a paper towel to clean it off. Again, do not press it down, lightly caress it off, okay? And I want to show you, kind of get a sense of how big that tip is. Oh yeah, I like that. That works for me. Now, one thing, it's a little hard to, what's the word? It's hard for me to know if your too small tip or too small amount of icing that's coming out is you or the tip of the bag if I'm not with you. When I'm doing an in-person class, I can come up and I will always take the bag from the person and I will test it myself to see if it's pressure or if it's the tip of the bag. Most often with a beginner, it is pressure, that you're not applying enough pressure on the bag. There's always this fear that you're going to pop the bag. If you're working with really cheap bags, you can pop the plastic. It will either be at the seam, or if you start to see stretch marks, like literal stretch marks, that's because your bag's about to pop. Excuse me. These bags, these Borderlands bakery bags, are my favorite. I've used hundreds, if not thousands of these, and I've had like one, maybe two pop ever, which I've used other brands where like every batch I'd have a couple pop. Anyway, so let's talk about pressure. Speaking of, we're going to start by piping lines here on this practice sheet. So as a right-handed person, I'm going to go from left to right. As a lefty, though, unlike with writing, you are actually going to go from right to left. Now, I'm not left-handed, so it's a little hard for me, from right to left, okay? So if I ever show you any directions, chances are you're going to want to flip it 180 degrees? Yeah, 180 degrees. If I'm putting a cookie at a certain angle, whatnot, because you always want to go from right to left. All right, so since we're working with a flood here, I'm not applying any pressure to get that icing out of the tip. I'm applying a tiny bit of pressure, and then I'm releasing. So you want to make contact, lift, contact. Now, piping lines with a flood is pretty hard. I would say it's harder than a piping consistency because your icing comes out really quickly. Don't worry at this point about, making too big of a bead at the beginning or the end of your line. I just want you to focus on piping as straight of a line as you can and not letting it break. If you get a break in your icing, it's either an air bubble or inconsistent pressure on the bag. With a flood, it's going to be a little kinder to you, but make contact, lift really high, anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to 1 inch plus. When you're piping a longer line, you want to lift higher. You can see how high I'm lifting my bag. Contact, lift, contact. Now, if you want to practice more lines than this, I might suggest switching to a different color just so you're not using too much of any one. I also want to have us practice flooding. So we just did some lines. Pause here if you want to practice more. We're only going to be doing hearts today, but it's always a good thing to practice a few more shapes. So let's start with a square. It's basically 4 lines. So contact, lift, contact, lift, contact, lift, contact, lift, contact. So you can see I'm piping at a 45-degree angle, and then I'm bringing my bag at a 90-degree angle, and I'm sticking the tip of my bag in the icing. So I'm not trying to do it from up here, right? I've got the tip of the bag in the icing, and I'm squeezing like I'm opening a tough pickle jar, okay? It is a big difference in pressure. Get my scribe here, then you can use your scribe, work really quickly, and kind of level that out. All right. And there we go. Now let's do a circle. You can do clockwise or counterclockwise, whatever feels good to you. I think it just depends on my mood, what I end up doing. And I just want to show you what it would look like if I'm not doing such a good job with my outline. My flood's kind of all over the place. This is the beauty of the scribe, okay? I'm going in like a circular motion. I am touching the paper or the cookie, if you're using a cookie, obviously. And this is the beauty of doing a one consistency outline in flood, is that you have, it's a lot, what am I trying to say? It's much more forgiving. As long as you can get to it fast enough before it starts to crust, you can really fix your outline. Now, you could even, like, this is a cookie, you could even move it around. I would actually recommend that. Whew. It's a little bit easier. Okay. And then you can actually kind of like stab it. I do recommend working on like a smooth surface so you can stab the cookie, jiggle it to help it settle. Voila. Can't tell if this is an air bubble. If you get an air bubble, I'm not sure if this is one, you just pop it. Okay, you pop it, and then you might get some peaks depending on how dry your icing is, and then you literally just jiggle the surface. Okay, but as a super beginner, I wouldn't worry about little peaks left over. Hashtag good enough, whatever. All right, let's do the heart now. We're going to be doing a lot of hearts today, obviously. There are 2 ways you can do a heart, okay? You can either do it this way, which is one continuous motion. But I would say that's the harder way to do it. The other way is to do one side, contact, contact, lift, contact, okay? Then I'm sticking my tip in the icing. I find a lot of beginners try to like flood from up here. No, literally you're gonna get the tip of your bag dirty, totally fine. Squeeze like a mad woman. If you think your tip is too small, even after like pickle jar strength, totally fine. You can cut more off your bag, but literally a sliver, not even a millimeter. Like start with 0.5 millimeter, a little sliver off, and see what that does for you. So the last thing I want to show you before we move on from the whatever this is called, practice sheet, is I want to show you what it looks like when you start to mess with your icing and it's too late. So, ooh, yeah, this is really bad. So you can see how it's wrinkling. At this point, it's like, it's too late. You can't work with your flood anymore. Let's see what the circle looks like. That one's not quite as bad, but so while it is very forgiving, in a sense to work with one consistency in terms of your outline and get like filling the whole space. It is thicker, so it's going to dry faster, right? This is kind of fun though. Make some like designs on here. Woo, okay. Grace is getting distracted, but it's so pretty. All right, stop getting distracted, Grace. Okay. So at this point, I'm done showing you the practice sheet. I'm just going to fold this up, throw this out, but certainly you can use the other side to practice with that. Let me just put this to the side. All right. So we're going to grab a cookie. And actually, I'm going to start with this one. All right. So we're going to start with a really basic flood here. Now, I do have my schedule to the side. And the way that I do my classes, even my pre-recorded classes, is I have them all in a very specific order so that you can complete the entire set in one go. Instead of doing like one entire cookie at a time. Now, the flip side to this set is actually most of the cookies are all done in one step, which is actually the beauty of this set, I think. But, you know, something like this, you start by flooding it. You got to let this dry and then you do the drip on top, right? Okay. Now let me get situated. Okay. So, as always, we need our purple. We need a paper towel. Just make sure I have this locked down. Okay, great. Oh, right. So I wanted to start with this one. So this is a brown sugar. If you used my updated recipe, no worries. If not, I've started messing with adding brown sugar. If you have a brown sugar clump, no problem. Only slight problem maybe if it's on the edge like this is, because sometimes it can kind of like mess with your beautiful crisp edge. So just keep that in mind. But if it's in the middle of it, no problem. All right, we're going to start easy here. Okay, we've got our purple. Remember, find your seam, line your seam up with your knuckles and the top of the bag with the top of your hand. Hold with your pointer and your thumb, wrap the rest of your fingers around. That's what I'm going to do here because we're just flooding. Now, do not flood all the way to the edge, okay? As a beginner, never flood all the way to the edge, all right? I'm just outlining this first, applying barely any pressure, making sure to make contact with the cookie at the beginning of the end and the end of my line, and I'm lifting my bag up. Do you see how much I'm lifting my bag up? Now I'm going to squeeze like a mad woman. Okay, this is a difficult pickle jar. And actually at this point with this size cookie, I'm kind of like, I think I might want to actually cut my tip of my bag a little bit bigger, but no problem. I can do that in a second. So I'm just filling in all the gaps, working really quickly. I'm going to stab my cookie, literally stabbing it. Sometimes I knock it against my finger just to help it settle. Jiggle the surface. If you have any like pokey bits up here, no problem, because you're going to cover that with the drip. Something else you can do to help icing settle is you can go like this, right? That's another option, but just make sure you keep your cookie level. The stab and the jiggle, I find just better because you're going to keep it against the table. All right, so we're going to put this aside because this needs time to dry. A couple notes on picking up your cookies. Try not to pick up your cookies like this because chances are, especially if your icing is too close to the edge, you're going to stick your thumb or your finger in it. I usually pick up my cookies like this. Well, I live on the edge, so often I do this. But I'd recommend picking up your cookies like this and always keep them level. Okay. Do not do this with your cookies. And I'll tell you why in a second. I'm just putting this in front of my fan so it has some time to dry. So if you do this with your cookie, well, obviously your icing could fall off the edge, but what often happens is if you ever have cracks on the surface of your cookie, that is because you probably moved your cookie too much at the point where the top of the flood just barely crusted, but the underneath is still very wet. And so it's like you've got this liquid moving around this barely dried surface. And so it's kind of like ice breaking, like an iceberg. Does that make sense? I don't know. Oops. Oh, I'm getting icing all over me. Okay. So keep your cookie as level as possible. So we're going to set that aside, let that dry. And then, all right, we're going to move on to this one. Okay. So I'm going to grab another cookie. Now, again, I'll say the beauty of so many of these designs is they can all be done in one go. I mean, there will be several steps, but there's no drying in between layers, yada, 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 which is pretty uncommon with royal icing designs. Often royal icing designs have like at least 2 layers, like this guy, where you need to let one dry before we move on to the next, but this is all one go, which I love. Makes everything super fast. Ooh, all right. So we need the purple again, and then we need the white. Now you have a choice here to use either the flood bag or the tiny bag. I actually like the flood bag with this one because it'll make bigger dots, which I want to make bigger hearts. So we haven't cut our white bag yet. So I'm going to grab my white bag, and don't be like me and cut over your cookies, but I don't feel like moving them. So let's remind ourselves how to cut bags. Get this in focus. I've got the seam on the bottom. I've got the fold on the top. Ooh, but I've got air bubbles. No, no, Grace. No, no. So I'm going to give it a little massage. And then I'm going to spin it around like a crazy person. Just kidding. I'm not crazy. I don't think. Oh, man. All right. Close my bag up. I'm feeling good about this. Okay, let's try this again. So I've got my fold on top. I'm lightly fluffing my bag to get it nice and straight. I'm going to take my scissors and cut about the same amount. Although, as I discovered with my purple, I wanted it to be a little bit bigger. You know what? I do. I want it. So I'm going to cut just a hair more. Oops, I have icing on my scissors. So I'll show you how much I just cut off. Okay, that I would actually call like a solid millimeter, I think. Let me cut a little bit more of this purple too. This, I think, will just be like a sliver. Oh, yeah. Whoops. Did my camera just move? No. Maybe. Okay. You see that? See how small that is? Tiny, tiny, tiny. Okay. So I feel like my camera did just move. All right, we're good. So we have our white cut, we have our purple cut. We also need our scribe handy. Where did I put my scribe? Oh, there it is. Hiding. Okay. So make sure your scribe is clean. Great. Before we do the design, I just want to talk through it. So we're going to flood it with purple. Then we're going to put dots at each of these hearts. Okay. You don't want to put the dots too close together. Otherwise, it's not going to really look like defined hearts. it'll look like, it'll still look pretty, but it won't look as hearty, if that makes sense. If you put them too far apart, they won't connect as well. And this is kind of a good distance for the size of the white that I'm going to use, I think. The distance that you want to do for optimal design is going to depend on how big your white polka dots are. So just keep that in mind. Now, let's get this party started. All right, I'm going to start by piping. Oops, you know what? Whatever, I'm just showing you a different way to do this. I don't know why I just decided to start on the bottom. The point here is do whatever you're most comfortable with. Again, not flooding all the way to the edge. I like that I cut the tip tiny bit bigger. The name of the game with wet on wet is to just move as quickly as possible. You know, get it more or less evened out. Don't spend too much time here though, because the more time you spend on it, the more time it has to crust. All right, now I have this as a marker. So I started here. I'm just doing, I'm at 90 degrees here. I guess this is about a centimeter apart. It's totally fine, by the way, to like put a dot in the bottom if that's what yours ends up looking like. Now, you want to start before the dot and pull it through in one continuous motion. Okay, I'm going to do a nice little bottom there, or bottom, angle, tip. Now I'm moving a little bit slower. Okay, and then I like to do like a little swirly at the bottom or at the end. I'm going to help this settle a little bit by jiggling the surface. And you can see here, I have a little bit of, what is this called? Wrinkles. Now, the reason I have wrinkles is because the icing started to crust. I definitely moved slower than I normally would because I was talking and distracted. That's going to happen if your icing is too thick, if you're moving too slowly. Something else to keep in mind, obviously, is like the icing towards the edge of the cookie is going to dry first because you flooded that first and you flooded the center last. So something you could do to help yourself out too is to like not flood or not put your dots quite so far to the edge. Something else you might find happen is like here, you can see there's like too much white pulling through. And that I tend to see happen when, let me demo, when the dot has not settled completely into the purple. So sometimes you can see here, it hasn't settled yet, but if you like jiggle the surface to help it settle, I find that gets like the best clean pull. But again, that's going to take you time. That's going to take time away from doing the pull. This is like next level, super beginner. Don't worry about it. Your hearts are beautiful. Okay. So, but look at that. We are already done. If you don't have enough icing, kind of white icing on the end, whoopsies, you might not get this cute little swirl. If you forget to do the swirl, totally fine. All right, but that's our first cookie, and I love that it's one and done. Ah, okay, so carefully pick this up. Now I can tell there's no icing towards the edge of my cookie, so I picked it up that way. I'm just gonna put that to the side. Maybe I should put like a done pile somewhere so I know we're done. Okay. All right, briefly, let's pause, and I want to show you how to hold one of these smaller bags. Now, unlike, how do you hold the bigger bags? Okay. So for this one, we're just going to, I like to balance it on my middle finger, and then I hold it basically with my pointer and my thumb, and I'm just applying pressure with my thumb. I mean, I guess you could apply pressure from all 3 fingers, but I'm just holding it very daintily at the top. This is 1 ounce of icing. If you followed the workbook, you probably have 2 ounces of icing, which means you may have more to work with, and you may want to hold your bag kind of more normally like this. That's totally fine. I have big hands, so 1 ounce for me, I want to hold it like this, but figure out what feels comfortable and what works for you. Gorgeous. Obsessively cleaning my surface. Okay. What are we doing next? We are doing this one next. Now, I just feel like pointing out, somehow I got a hole in the icing. I think something must have hit it. Very odd. Anyway. But these are rock hard sample cookies. So not going to do anything with those anyway. All right. This design, really simple. If you want something more complicated, you could do like a full-on plaid situation, but I kind of simplified this because the more lines you have, the harder it is. You could even just do like a simple crisscross, whatever strikes your fancy. Now you can tell with this that I started with the pink lines and then I went over with the white. I like that visually. Yeah, it works for me. But that you have to make sure that as you're piping the pink, you're leaving enough space in between the white. And since you're using a flood consistency, always remember that the flood is going to spread out after you pipe it. So just keep that in mind. You could start with the white and then do the pink. But you know, this is how I did it. All right, so for this one, we are going to use the smaller white and pink with our normal purple. Okay, so let's cut our bags. Now, since I tied these, I can't do as much with them, but this is great. Just kind of whack it. I did it pretty tight, so there's not like a lot of room to move around here. Okay, let's cut the tip of these bags. These are going to be much smaller tips. And I like to brace my scissors against my pointer finger, as you can see. I think that looks good. Trying to find one of the other ones that I cut for size comparison. Whoops. Oh, sorry, y'all. Okay, I lost my little. There we go. Okay. This is much smarter. There we go. Grace, use your brain. Okay, so you see the difference. This is like the 3 to 4 millimeter range, and this is like the 5 to 6-ish, something around there. We want to do, so that will get us, just show you, like, that's how big the line's going to be with like minimal pressure. Actually, as I'm looking at this, do I want a slightly bigger? You know what? I want like a hair bigger than this. A hair. See, tiny bit. Tiny bit. Oh yeah, that makes all the difference. That's perfect. Okay, so let's see if I can replicate that with the white one. Again, you can always cut more, and this is always a learning experience. So as a total beginner, you're probably not going to get it right, and that's fine. Just make sure I don't. think I keep cutting. So I'm cutting this like a hair bigger, just like I did with the pink one. To me, yes, I like this. Okay. So always have all of your icing ready to go. Trying to set up my space here. Ooh. All right. Got my paper towel. Another sip of water. And we've got our purple. If you've used a lot of icing like I have, you might want to just take the clip off, squeeze it down, give yourself a nice fresh top of the bag, clean your bag off. And we're going to get started, and we're going to move quickly because we're doing wet on wet. So here's another way to do this. I'm comfortable going both directions. It is harder though, because remember I said it's always good to like pipe in the same direction. Where's my scribe? All right, moving quickly, just getting the big gaps out of the way, getting it to settle pretty well. And then taking my little bags, and I think I like to start with this line first. Okay. And then do like about 1 centimeter apart. And then I think I like to go here with this line. And then again, about 1 centimeter apart. And remember, to get nice straight lines, make sure you lift your bag off the surface of the icing anywhere from 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch in this case. Yeah, I definitely could have done those closer. Okay. And then if you have like too much sticking up, which you're probably going to get at the beginning and the end of the line, if you want to really refine things, you can take your scribe and kind of jiggle the icing. But this is next level. Again, if you have some icing sticking up, whatevs, yo. Okay. But this is like next level finesse. Okay. So I'm just settling, I'm not sticking my scribe in the icing. I'm settling the icing on the surface. Okay. So my note to myself here is I put the pink lines too far apart. It's still pretty. Don't get me wrong. It's just not like my original design. Both are great. If you did one or the other, fine. I would just say in terms of like line placement, I like to do this pink line first and do it as close to the top as looks good. Whoops, got some icing on here. That's why I like to do this pink line first, and then I like to do this pink line first because I like to put it, you know, like as close to this, again, whatever this is called. I don't actually, you know what? This is growing on me. I don't know which one I like better. To each their own. All right, we are done with another cookie. I'm gonna put this to the side. Whoa, I think I just, uh-oh. Whew, I almost thought I stuck my hand in that purple one that's drying. All right, we are doing the purple leopard next, one of my favorites. Now, if you've been around a minute, I put leopard on like everything. And I love it for beginner because it's meant to look messy. So something like this probably looks easier than this, right? And in a way it is, because it's like it's less icing, but to get your dots to look nicely placed, the same size, mine don't even look the same size, it's actually quite challenging. Whereas with the leopard, it's kind of meant to look messy, right? So you start off with you flood it purple, obviously, then you put the pink on in blobs, and then you put the white on top in kind of messy. Sometimes you do it one side, sometimes you do two sides, put some blobby lines, dots around it, and call it a day. I love designs that are, I don't know why I keep doing this. This is not very comfortable for me to, to outline from the bottom up. Anyway, what was I saying? I like designs that are forgiving, right? So especially for beginners, like this is not meant to look perfect, kind of trying to intentionally do this kind of messy this time. So you can see I'm using my scribe, I'm working quickly. I want to make sure it's pretty even. You are going to add a decent amount of icing to this. Oh, let's spread this. This is not quite. Oh my gosh, having a hard time with this angle here. Okay. I don't think it was quite far enough to the edge here. All right. What was I saying? Oh, you're going to add a decent amount of icing with the white and the pink. So if you're going to do anything, underflood it a little bit. Definitely do not get anywhere near the edge of the cookie. Mine's already starting to kind of spread out. So we are putting icing on top of the purple, okay? We are not like injecting the purple. We are piping on top of the purple. Make these uneven. That's going to look the best. Then go in with your white. And again, some can go two sides, some can go one way around. Name of the game here is to just work as quickly as possible. And you can see here, I just wanted to demonstrate that I did a little bit less of a design, or like fewer blobs on this one that I just did. Now this needs some help settling. So I'm doing a little bit of a jiggle on the surface. You can also, do not stab it, okay? You can tap it like this. And it will start to settle. But at this point, it's done. Now, I'm going to sacrifice this cookie for you because I see that it's starting to go a little too far off the edge. And you have two options here. You can just let it be, or you can try to fix it. So I can tell it's not too much icing. I think it'll be fine, and the icing's on the thick side. Also, scraping it off when you have a design like this is just going to mess up the design. So I would not recommend it. So you can still have a pretty cookie, but for the sake of this being a class, I want to show you how you fix icing that's over flooding. You can only do this with a one consistency outline and flood. If you have a dried outline from two consistencies, nope. So what you do, so you can see this kind of going over the edge, is you take your scribe and you actually scrape the edge of the cookie. So you can see I took some icing off, not a lot. You can also see that this was too far gone, like this icing was too dried. So I can actually take my scribe and like try to fix this and jiggle this. And like I can do a decent job to fix this so no one will know. What you didn't really get to see, what I was hoping for, is that like if you have a design here, it can kind of drag the design and make it look worse. So just keep that in mind. All right, but that's how you fix your icing if it is going over the edge. So putting that to the side, another cookie down. All right, what do we have next? We're going to move on to this crackle situation. So this is a two-step cookie in the sense that we're going to flood this first, then we need to let it sit until it dries a little bit, and then we do the crackle. So this is where if you have an edible marker. It could be helpful. Absolutely not necessary. So I am going to use it just because I have it. And then we're going to just mark out some waves. Now, super important here, not to go all the way to the edge, because remember, we're not flooding all the way to the edge. So if you do go all the way to the edge, you're going to have marker poking out, which is not a good look. Okay, let me organize my icing a little bit. We need the big pink, which we have not used yet. So I'm going to give this a little massage. Just as like a sidebar here, a couple things. All right, first of all, I was really messy when I was bagging my icing here. And so what has happened is this icing at the top has crusted and it's like flaking off, which can't tell you how many times when this happens, like it will flake into what I'm flooding and it's so annoying. The other thing I was going to say is that you can see we started with the purple and then we're going pink and then we're going to go to the white ones. Not a big deal with this set because it's a pretty small set. Well, I know it's 12 designs, but it's going to go pretty quickly. But I find that when I am tackling my set for the day, like what order I want to do everything, I like to start with the cookies with the darker colors, because that has more food coloring in it, and the darker the color, usually the faster it separates. And once icing starts to separate, it won't be as beautifully pure of a color like this. Even if you incorporate it, you might still get some like striations, which some people think look cool, but like I like it to look even if I can. All right, let's cut the pink. Okay, we're getting to be pros here, right? I say pros, but I think I want to cut that a tad bit bigger. Okay. All right, we've got our big white, pink, and purple all ready to go. If you didn't draw out these lines, no problem. Trying to make sure this is not focusing. Great. Okay. We're going to start with the purple on top, clean off the tip of my bag. Again, not flooding all the way to the edge. Contact, lift, contact, lift, contact. So same idea. We're just outlining and flooding in. Now you can kind of finesse each color as you go, but work really quickly, okay? Do not waste your time finessing each color. All right, and then there are two ways that you can join these colors. I would start by outlining this bottom first, getting the edge. And then for this, I usually like to do an outline literally touching the previous color, okay? And then I flood up next to it. So that's one way to do it. Working quickly. Do not get your scribe very close to the outline because it will mess up your outline. Let me see if I can show you. Look at that. Like if you pulling, okay, it's not as pretty anymore. I don't want to get too close. See if I can really mess it up. Yeah, okay, look, got too close. Oh no, Grace. Okay. I can probably fix that. But I would not recommend doing that. You know, stay like a few millimeters away from your outline. Okay, the other way you can connect them, again, do the outer portions And then you can just flood up. When I say flood, I mean like flood pressure. The first one is like outline pressure. This one is flood pressure. Now, in this case, I don't think the outline is quite as nice. It's okay. It's fine. So just want to make sure that I'm like got everything connected here. Now, if you've got some like pokey bits here, it's fine. Don't worry about it, because we're going to ultimately crackle it, and no one's going to know. Beautiful, right? So people always ask me, you know, how long do I wait to crackle? And unfortunately, there is no like direct answer to that. The reason for that is because the amount of time you need to wait depends on the environment you're working in and the thickness of your icing. If the icing is thicker, it's going to take less time to dry. If it's thinner, it's going to take more time. If you're working in a really hot, humid environment, it's going to take more time to dry. If you're working in a really dry, cool environment, it's going to take less time to dry. So what I typically do is I set a timer for 10 minutes and I come back and I check it and I see what the situation is. So I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes and it's going to be 10 minutes in my time. But obviously, if you're pausing this video and you're doing more than I'm doing, then you may just want to set your own timer so you can stop what you're doing when that goes off. Yeah, because I'm not sure at what point 10 minutes will hit, but we'll see. And something else to keep in mind is that this is the nice crackle stage. So there's a nice crust on this. If you do this and it's like an indentation, that is because the icing is not quite dry enough. Okay, so I'm going to set this to the side to dry with my purple over here. I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes. Usually it's more like 15, but on the day it happens to be 10. I don't want to be thrown off guard. Okay, we're doing pink polka dots next. So remember I said this is a deceptively hard design. Okay. You can also see my white is beautifully popping, and that is because I do add white food coloring to my icing. It is not necessary, okay? I spent years not adding white food coloring to my icing, but I do it now because I think it adds a nice pop. Now, what was I gonna say? I was gonna say something. I don't know what I was gonna say. No. You can also add just the tiniest bit of purple to offset any yellow in your white icing, but I do not recommend that for beginners because we're talking like the most minuscule amount of purple, and you do not want to accidentally make your white icing purple. Not a vibe. I was just losing my train of thought momentarily also because I was like, which thickness do I want to use to make these dots? So I'm going to use the small bag, which is going to make smaller dots. But if you want to have bigger dots, you can use the large bag of white, okay? So for this, we're going to grab our pink flood and our white of choice. And you know what, actually, I think I'm going to show you both whites so you can see the difference. Ooh, and as I'm flooding this, I think my pink is thicker than my white and my purple, but I'm gonna make it work, y'all. It's not too thick. It's just, I can just tell it's slightly thicker. So you can do your polka dots in like a methodical way, like I did, or you can do them in whatever fashion you want. So I'm going to go methodical. I'm going to start with my bigger icing here. This is my flood. I like to do methodical because that's how my brain works. And I just want to show you the difference. I applied barely any pressure, by the way. And again, this is a bit more pressure though. This is really stressing me out. Oh, okay. Okay, not as good. Clearly not as good. For these ones that are kind of sticking up on the end, again, I'm going to take my scribe and just kind of help them settle. But next level vibes here. Not necessary for a super beginner. Okay. So that right here, somehow a little crusty bit of white got in my icing. I'm just messing it up. Okay, should not have done that. Oh well, okay. So you're probably like, Grace, these dots look like basically the same. Please don't look at my, look at my dots, but don't look at my dots. I'm not proud of these dots, but that's okay. You're probably going to say these look like almost exactly the same. Like, why does it matter to have a smaller bag? Well, here's the difference. So what you didn't see is what I felt. And that is when I was piping the larger dots with the bigger bag, the icing just comes out, right? And I don't have a lot of control. So I'm just basically tapping the icing in, and it is what it is. With the smaller bag, I actually had to apply pressure to get those dots that size. Because if I didn't apply pressure, let me show you what the dot would look like. Like, that's just straight out of the bag, right? But if I apply more pressure, and again, we're just like putting icing on the top of the pink. Doesn't look great because the icing has already started to crust, but you get the picture. So there's our simple but not easy polka dots. Next up, we're doing this one. Okay. Not everyone likes this design, but I'm a big fan. And I actually did this in the heart shape series that I did a while ago. And I love it. I think it's fun. It's funky. It's a little geometric. It's different, sort of. All right. For this one, you definitely want the smaller white and then the larger pink. And what's great about this is another one kind of like the leopard, where you just, free falling, do as many lines as you want. There's no like precision needed like the polka dots, which I really appreciate. Again, just kind of settling my icing as quickly as possible. Taking my white, cleaning it off, and then just going for it. So I'm laying my icing on top of the pink. And of course, I'm lifting my bag to get those nice straight lines, anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch for this application. Whoops, my line broke there, definitely because I was not applying consistent pressure, because I'm stressing myself out for some reason. I don't know why. Oh no, did it again. All right, I like to do as much like crisscrossing as possible. Like 90-degree angles, not 90-degree angles. Okay. I'll do one more here. Stop. Okay. At some point, you just have to stop. And, if your icing's on the thinner side, you can definitely get away with doing like more lines. My icing is on the thicker side. I told you that pink I could tell is like slightly thicker than my white. And my purple. And even though I do think my white is thinner than my pink. It doesn't really matter in terms of, you can see this, like the white kind of sticking on top, because it's about how fast the pink dries. Okay. Fewer the lines, easier it is. I think maybe I had fewer lines on this one, but I was having fun, y'all. Okay. That's the pink, or this design. You know, don't worry if you have little beads at the beginning of your lines, not a big deal. Okay. So put that aside. We've got another one finished. What are we doing next? Just checking my timer. We've got a couple minutes left. Pink wet on wet pull. Okay. This is next. All right. So we need for this one, the large pink and then the small purple and small white. So we haven't used our small purple yet. So I'm just going to go ahead, cut the tip of this bag. Beautiful. Same kind of small, probably 4 millimeters-ish. Now, this, okay. We're going to work, well, we are always working quickly here, okay? But especially anytime you have a scribe pull, you are sticking an object in the icing, right? And you are manipulating the icing. And so if it is starting to dry, it will be even more prominent because you're going to have those wrinkles. Whereas like with the polka dots, if the icing is too thick, it'll just kind of sit on top. All right, so we're starting with the purple line, applying barely any pressure on the top of that bag. Ooh, and there goes my timer. I want these to be pretty close together. Turn my timer off. Okay, and then move fast. So starting from above the line, you see, I'm pulling down and I'm coming like 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch almost. That's where you get, excuse me, frog in my throat. That's where you get those nice curves above and below. If you don't go far enough, let me show you what it looks like. That's what it looks like. I mean, it's a whole other vibe, all right? But go far enough up, try to make your lines, your pulls even. And then if you get, you might get a little bit of wrinkling towards the end, jiggle the surface if you want to, not necessary. And there we go. Something I did not address is how to hold these tiny bags. You've been seeing me. I've just been holding them at the top, just like this, like cute little yes, okay. I think I'll add something maybe at the beginning of the video too, but just to show you here how to actually hold a small bag. So I'm just applying pressure with my thumb, right? That's how I'm getting the icing out. Now let's put this to the side because we are done with this one. All right, so our timer went off. So we need to check on our crackle and see if it's ready. Obviously, I didn't stop everything when I hit 10 minutes, and that's totally fine. Because this is not that sensitive. I mean, don't wait another 5 minutes, but like another minute or two, totally fine. So I'm going to sacrifice this and see if it looks like. Okay, I think this is crackled enough. Just barely. And I know that because it's giving me a nice like crack on the surface and not an indent. If you're getting an indent, you need to wait longer. So what's important here is you are cracking the surface. You are not puncturing the surface. If you pick up your tool and you have icing on the end of it, that means you're going too far. Okay, we are cracking the surface. I usually try to like not make the cracks super methodical because I think it looks better when they're not. But clearly I have a very like methodical brain. So that's sometimes hard. And if you can, you know, goal here is to, oh, I can see I punctured that, got a little bit of icing coming out. Try to make them even, like evenly sized, but also again, like I think it looks great if they're not even. Here I didn't go quite far enough, so I'm just going to go back through. Also, don't go all the way to the edge. Give yourself like a millimeter on the edge. Okay. She gorge. I love the crackle. First of all, it's like a very simple technique. It's very effective. I like that it gives you this like extra sparkle. Obviously, there's like a lot of extra sparkle because it's still wet, but I think it's really cool. Gives you some texture, very simple technique. So that's the crackle. Now that one is done. Amaze balls. Add that to our done list. What are we doing next? All right, so what's next? I'm gonna veer off. I know we have one more pink one to do, but I want to do this this line one because we recently did another line one and I want you to kind of see the difference. So with this one, this is a continuous pull. You never lift your scribe up. But with this one, you can see there are clean pulls. You do a pull, clean off your scribe, do another pull, clean off your scribe, okay? So what's nice about this one is that it takes less time, obviously, because you don't have to pull your scribe out. Every time you pull your scribe out, clean it off, just takes more time. But it's a different look, it's a different effect, and I think everyone should know how to do it. So I also want to just take a look here and remind myself how many pulls I did. So I usually do them all in one direction first, and then all in the other direction. So let's see. It looks like I started by going up. So I went in the center, I went all the way to the edge, and I split the difference, and then I pulled through. Okay, so for this, we're going to need our large white and our small purple and small pink. All right, cleaning my tips off so I'm like ready to rock and roll. And let's do it. So like I said, anytime you're doing a design where you have to clean off your scribe, you just have to work all the faster. All right. And you could definitely do fewer lines here to make it easier. Just doing this kind of messy to show you again. Work fast. Fast is the name of the game here. I forgot to check how many lines I did of everything. Oh man. Okay. What did I start with? Okay, we started with the pink. Pink. Right, so I did one across here, one here, one here. And again, you could make this easier by doing fewer lines. I think it looks prettier with more lines. Now have your paper towel ready and whoops, clean off your scribe. All right, I'm pulling through the center, pulling all the way on the edge. Try not to touch the cookie if you can. So I pulled up now. Now I'm going to do all the ones in the middle. I'm going to pull down now. And it's important to make sure that you're starting before the line, so you get that nice, pretty pull. And there we go. If you have anything sticking up, as always, you can kind of settle it. Voila. If you need to, carefully give it a little bit of tap like this. And there she is. She's beautiful. Oh, all right. Sometimes I just admire my own work. There we go. All right, next up. So we're going to be doing the 2 flower ones. Well, next, we're going to start with this one because I think in a way this is easier. And then we're going to move to this one. So for this kind of heart, again, these are 2 heart flowers. These are 2 very classic ways to do flowers, different techniques. This one, we're going to flood white, do 5 pink dots, pull the dots in, and then put the white or the purple center. So for this, you need the big white, small pink, small purple. So as always, move quickly. Okay. Settle your icing. You can do fewer flowers. That would be easier. If you're looking for a challenge, you can do more flowers, but depending on the thickness of your icing, you may be limited. So let's see. I did them in the corner first. You want to make sure your dots are like as close together as they can be without touching. That's going to give you the best look. Whoops, I just touched there. If they're too close, it will be a little more blobby. If they're too far apart, then they won't look much like a star. Whoops, I did not do that evenly. Okay, so this is what is, I think, easier about this is that, so I'm going from the center of the dot, pulling in, center of the dot, pulling in, and I don't clean off my scribe. And I actually like that look better than cleaning off my scribe because I like that you can see a little bit of pink or a little bit of white in the middle. You want to make sure that you're only pulling to the center of the flower. If you go too far, like, let me see, like here, you're going to manipulate the shape of the flower and a petal next to it. So be careful. Probably the hardest part, well, there are 2 hard parts on this one. Let me finish this first. Okay. Then once you're done with all your pulls, then just stick a little purple dot in the middle. And if you have time and you're looking to get even fancier, you could add purple polka dots. But I was really trying to make this simple. That's also pretty too. That's kind of like a next level approach here. And there we go. Oh, she pretty. She pretty. Oh, right, where what I was saying. So the hardest part probably is like getting the 5 dots in the right spot so you get like a nice flower shape, and then not pulling too far with your dots. Okay. So that's that. Now, the difference with this here is just like with the difference in those lines, we're actually going to be pulling from the outside. And then we're going to be cleaning off our scribe after every single pull. So it's important to have your paper towel ready to rock and roll. So cleaning the scribe off after every pull. What else was I going to say? This is actually just a circle. And then you pull in 5 times. So like 5 petals here, 5 pulls here. Then we're going to work really fast and add these dots. This is a lot of dots to add, so a simpler way would be to just add one dot. I like the look of the 3, but that might be a little too challenging for some, and that's okay. It's still cute with just single dots. All right. And I only did 3 flowers here because this is harder to do, in my opinion. All right. Let's go. So we need our big pink and we need our small white and small purple. So just flooding. And with most of these designs, like you're not adding that much icing with the design. But if you are doing a wet on wet with a lot of extra icing, I mentioned this earlier, it's good to just like not use as much icing when you flood. Definitely don't go all the way to the edge. All right, so I'm piping my circle on top of the pink. It does not need to be a perfect circle. Okay. I always like to start by pulling where I began and ended the circle. I'm cleaning my scribe off after every pull. I'm going towards just the center. And there we go. So you can see, making sure you're always starting from the outside of the line, cleaning off after every pull, going towards just the center. I think this looks totally fine too if you're not like being super even with the spacing of your pulls. And then again, I'm doing clusters of 3 dots, but an easier way to do this would be to just do 1 dot. And also do fewer clusters. And there we go. Tap it a little bit if you need to. You might have some peaking in the center. Next level, you can, settle that out. But again, not necessary. It's super beginner. It still looks really cute. So proud of myself. Okay. All right, we've got the pink flower done. What do we have left to do? Okay, we only have 2 cookies left to finish. We still need to do the drip on this. And then we're going to do this one, which is my ombre. Oops, do it this way. I've seen this really cool effect, but with an airbrush. I don't have an airbrush. So yeah, we're just going to rock icing. Find my brain. All right. So for this one, we need the big pink, the big white. We need our scribe and we need our sprinkles. Okay. So let me demo this in the way I would normally do it. So pour a bunch of sprinkles in the bowl. Make sure you have your bowl and your spoon handy. Now, with this, it is extremely important you do not flood all the way to the edge, okay? Do not flood all the way to the edge, all right? Because the weight of the sprinkles is going to spread out the icing and yeah. But I am going to, I think, intentionally try to add a little too much, maybe to one side, just so I can show you how you can very easily peel it off. So this is how I have found that I like to do this ombre, is I actually only start with this over here with pink, and then I flood the rest of it in white. You can see I am not going all the way to the edge. And then I add some pink lines. And this is going to help me start that ombre. So you can see here, I'm like, whatever, not being perfect. Okay, I actually need to brace myself here. Okay, hold the cookie and then as messily as possible. You have permission to be messy here, okay? Because you really want it to start to create that ombre. You don't want it to look perfect. I find if it looks perfect, once you cover it in sprinkles, then you don't get as much ombre. But obviously, if you're not gonna cover this in sprinkles, no problem. Then like what the ombre looks like matters a little bit more. All right. I think that's good enough. And I think that's going to fall off on the other side. So you don't need to be too perfect here. I think it's going to fall off, which is good because I want to show you what to do, but this is good enough. Then I'm going to put my cookie over the sprinkles. You can see I still have some peaks, totally fine. So it's going to get covered with sprinkles. Now, if you bought the smaller size sanding sugar, not a problem. It'll just, it won't have as much of an effect, if that makes sense. So I can already see that it is falling off the side on the top here. Now I can take my finger and kind of encourage it in. If you have something like this, my favorite tool for kind of massaging the corners. But what I did want to show you, and I'm going to see if I can get this to kind of fall off the side. If you've got overflood, there we go, I've got overflood. So I'm going to, if you work quickly, scrape off the edge. Okay. Because there's like only so much massaging you can do if you've got too much icing. Now the edge is exposed. All you have to do is just cover it back up with sprinkles and no one's gonna know that you peeled off excess. And you see, I like how messy my ombre is because I think that creates like the best effect. I'm a fan. All right. We are now done with this cookie. Oh, but make sure before you put it away that like you've done all of the finessing you can, because once it starts to dry, if you do this, it's gonna like clump up all funny. So it's like now or never, basically. And you can see I really did not flood all the way to the edge, well, except up here. And you can see it is now all the way to the edge because the weight of the sprinkles. So I'm going to put this to the side. All right, let's grab our purple. This is our last cookie of the set. And I want to check the level of dryness. So it is definitely drying. It's a little tacky to the touch. So if you have dry icing or very dry icing or on the way to dry icing, it'll be like satiny and you can totally run your finger over it. This kind of stops my finger. Even if it's satiny and not totally dry, you can't apply pressure, but it's like totally smooth. This is like a tiny bit tacky. This is the least dry. I would recommend doing this technique. If it's too wet, obviously it won't be able to like hold up the drip, but also the sprinkles will stick to the purple, which is not ideal. If you want to wait a little bit longer until the icing is like more satiny and like really smooth, that's totally fine. This is the minimum dryness I would go with. Now I just want to show you a little bit of pressure. And I just made a slight indent. I'm doing this obviously in a spot that's going to get covered with the drip. So we need, I'm actually going to use the big white for this. And then for this one, we're just going to sprinkle it. So I often just like to like put it in the cap, or you could take the bowl too. But for this one, the first thing I like to do is just outline the top. And you're going just barely to the edge if you can, or leave like a millimeter. And then either you can like outline it like this, okay? Or you can just start flooding basically. So when I say flooding, like flood pressure, I like this technique the best personally. I think it gets the most authentic drips. But both look cute. Don't put too much icing on there. I might have gone a little too far there. Whoopsies. Settle that out a little bit. I'm not puncturing the icing. I'm just kind of jiggling the surface. And then with a clean hand, take your sprinkles and just kind of sprinkle them, right? So as long as your icing is dry enough, your purple icing, if you get some sprinkles on the icing like this, don't worry about it. Do not touch it right now though, okay? For all, please do not. I'll tell you why in a second. So again, this is just sprinkling. I'm not covering the whole thing. If you have other cute sprinkles, that's great. But since we used these for this design, I think it's cute to use this. You could use like other like actual jimmies or whatever you call sprinkles for icing. Now, the reason why, I could mess with this and like remove these sprinkles right now, but well, okay, I can do it. I would not recommend it though. I would wait until this is totally dry, and then these excess sprinkles should just very easily flake off. What else to say here? If you did not add white food coloring to your base, I would probably suggest waiting a little bit longer to put the white icing on top of the purple, just because white gel coloring in the icing tends to help prevent color bleed. I can see here that I kind of have slightly wet purple icing. It's not wet, it's still dry on top. I don't know if I'm explaining this very well. Anyway, if you got a little bit of color bleed, don't worry about it. It's fine. Every once in a while, I still get color bleed, and I'm an advanced expert cookier, but I'm just nitpicking here. Okay, enough nitpicking. We are here today to have fun, right? What else can I say here? Okay, I think we're done. Oh my goodness. All right, this was a long class. Thank you for joining me. There are notes in your workbook about how to store your cookies. Now, the essence though is that with royal icing, you cannot put them in an airtight container until they are completely dry, okay? Make sure they are sitting somewhere flat. So like, don't rest them on like the wire cookie dry, the wire racks, that you, that you dry cookies on. My God. I'm losing my brain. The wire racks that you cool cookies. Thank you. Finding the right words. Okay. Because you don't want to have air exposure on the bottom of the cookie. You want it to be totally covered. And then, so as long as your cookie is covered in icing and it's on a flat surface, leave it to dry overnight, 6 to 8 hours, depending on your environment. And once the icing is hard, then you can put it in a container. And there are notes in the workbook about storing leftover icing as well. You don't need to throw out your icing unless you really want to. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me today for this class. I really enjoyed walking you through a lot of different designs. We covered a lot, very fun. And yeah, I hope you had some fun. Hope you learned, well, you definitely learned a thing or two. And I can't wait to see you in the next class. So thanks all. Bye.